Okay.
And of course, welcome to Brother James and Peter and T. Billings. Grateful for you being here. Feel free to jump in as you see fit. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Oh, it says you've disabled screen sharing, Brother Steve.
Well, this is always the problem. Try it again, please.
Here we go. All right. All right. Okay, I think we're on. Let me go back to the beginning. So thank you for joining. My name's John. I'm at Bishop McNamara High School. As I shared a minute ago, this is my first convocation. I couldn't be more grateful to be a part of the team. I transitioned into Bishop McNamara High School here in Forestville, Maryland, in June of last year. And so kind of right in the middle of the pandemic. Before this, I worked in charter schools in DC, and the work of educating our youth is largely the same, albeit with some different parameters. And so I'm excited to share a little bit of the work that I feel passionate about as it relates to our young people. And for this session specifically, really, the work as it involves students, but also as it involves our faculty and staff. And so if you manage a team, lead a department, or if you teach students, all of these included, we're going to be talking about what it means to manage and to lead. I love that we are a small and nimble group, and I would love to just take a minute just to do a quick whip around the room. Who's here and where are you coming from? And then we'll dive in. So anyone's welcome to jump in.
Whitney, would you like to start?
Sure. So I'm Whitney Daly from Gilmore Academy. I've been there for 14 years. I'm the Director of Mission Integration and the Theology Department Chair there. And I have been a part of a number of convocations, but I'm excited to be able to participate in a different way this year. Just a FYI for you, I have 4 young boys. So the oldest just had a baseball game and just got home. So if you hear noise in the background, it's them. But oh, here's one dancing for you. That's a little bit about me and my life. And I'm excited to learn from the session.
Great.
Thank you, Whitney. Bob?
Bob Nolte. I'm also from Bishop McNamara High School in Forestville, Maryland. I have spent the last year or so serving as their Director of Enrollment Management, overseeing the admissions office and all the financial aid and scholarships that we use to assist families and award to worthy students. But in the last week was shifted over to the business office. I am now the new, the interim Director of Business at Bishop McNamara. So looking forward to starting that new role at McNamara. I also have 3 kids. 2 of mine are not home, so the noise level should be okay. Mine are all teenagers, so they're usually pretty quiet. So hopefully no exterior noise.
Very good. Thank you, Bob. T. Billings, may I ask what the T is for?
The T is for Teresa. So Teresa,
great name.
Holy Cross, New Orleans. So I've been there for 22 years.
Very good.
Currently, I'm the Chief Mission Officer, which means I'm in charge of counseling, student activities, campus ministry, admissions. I think that's it. Both of mine are grown and out the house. So one is the graduate of Holy Cross, and so it should be quiet at my house, but I'm looking forward to it. Thank y'all.
Thank you, Teresa. Peter.
Peter Shelley, I'm the Director of Holy Cross Mission at Monroe Catholic High School. It's my 26th year there. I have two 5-year-old twins, but I think they're going to take a nap. So we're in the process of getting things quieter here. I've been to every convocation since 2004, and I must say the scope and the depth of the sessions and the themes is by far, and this obviously goes back to the work of Marco and the committee, but this is so far just been great stuff. So kudos to everyone.
Very good.
Very good type of thing with it. Brother James, did we lose you?
No, I'm here.
Okay, good.
I'm Brother James Spooner. I've been 17 years as associate principal, and I'm currently interim president as well at Archbishop Hoban High School in Akron. Good to see Whitney. We're both in the Cleveland Diocese, even though Akron's about 35 miles apart. But I'm pleased to be here. This is my second convocation in the new format, but the first one was about 15 years ago. So long time going to these.
Very good.
Very good.
Well,
Very
clearly surrounded by some really rich history of organization and big impacts with students. Before we begin, would love to open in prayer. If you could, please join me. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
Heavenly Father, thank you for your many blessings of knowledge in our craft of teaching and leading. Today, we ask of you to guide us with open-mindedness, a yearning to understand multiple perspective, and a gift of gratitude. We know this work is nothing without you and ask for your light and spirit to guide us in our study. In your name we pray, amen. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. So it is good to see kind of who's in the room. And as I shared before, this will be a little more conversational, but I've got a bit of content that I would love to share first. The title of the program is pretty direct here. So it is all about mitigating marginalization of faculty and students. And we're going to talk about kind of that buzzword marginalization. What does that mean? What are the roots? Where is it coming from? But what is our role in education in preventing folks and people from feeling marginalized? A little background share that I'm with Bishop McNamara. I'm the president here at Bishop McNamara, formerly in charter school world with KIP. KIP is a national charter brand and joined KIP in DC about 14 years ago and grew from 2 schools to we're at 20 now. And so the motivation for me to move over was really rooted pretty deeply in my faith, but also as a dad. And so I've played a few different roles as student and teacher and principal, and now leading McNamara. And in my free time after this, would love to chat through cycling, writing, and closet meteorology. I pretend like I know what I'm talking about. Really 3 goals in our conversation today. The first is to examine what is our position within the spaces we lead and teach. By space, I mean, I think I'm a sociologist by undergrad study. That was my degree. And space for me is any place that you occupy, either physically or psychologically, whether it's the boardroom, the gymnasium, in a meeting, what space do you hold? Goal 2 is to kind of identify causes of marginalization and othering in our schools. And number 3 is what are some ways that we can prevent it? And we're going to talk about what these terms mean here in a moment. Agenda, I'm going to ask you to hold 2 assumptions for this meeting, things that I need you to believe and buy into, if not forever, at least for these 60 minutes. And then we're going to talk about our identities, lenses to look at our identities, and again, this idea of marginalization. Oh, I couldn't see the picture here. Let me go back. Forgive me. Okay, so this is me. I couldn't see that before. Now I can see it. I put a picture of my little one up. I do have 3 little ones, twin 18-month-olds. They're napping right now, so I'll speak at a moderate volume. But I shared a little bit of my move from the schools I managed before into Holy Cross was influenced by my children. There was a point in leading schools where I realized I didn't want them to go to the school that I was a principal at. And it was a crisis. I had a moral struggle, an internal struggle around what that meant. And there were two reasons. The first was, in the public school system, we can't preach faith. We can't discuss faith. There's a lot of rules around that. It was important to me that my children went to a faith-aligned school. But second, I think that was the easy answer. Perhaps the more important one was the school I was leading, we couldn't and we didn't affirm children in the way that I wanted my own children to be affirmed when they went to school. And I think some folks, some leaders can say, oh, no, my children should go to a different school. We live out of district, we live out of zone, or I want to save seats for children who are in need. And that was a messy answer for me. And so a lot of my work now in examining spaces in schools and how students and children and adults feel in those spaces is motivated by, creating a space for my own child. And I think for a lot of us, and I suspect even on this call, that's a big duh. Of course, my own children would go to school with me, but that's not the case for educators everywhere. And me personally, in my own story, that motivated a lot of the work that I want to share with you here today. All right, so we talked through our goals, a little bit of an agenda here. Let's go ahead and dive in. So a couple of important terms that I first want to throw out there. And we're going to use some working definitions on them. So the working definition for positionality is simply where you exist socially, where you exist. For example, my position as president in a school gives some authority, gives some decision making. On this panel, my position gives the ability to click through the PowerPoints, to engage a speaker, not engage a speaker. So that's my positionality. The working definition for privilege is a benefit or advantage afforded based on an identity or membership. So a benefit or advantage granted or afforded to someone based on an identity they hold or a membership to a group or institution. Perhaps the most important terms we're going to discuss today. And again, they could go by 100 different definitions, but the ones that I'll use today for marginalization and othering, it is becoming minoritized. So becoming separated, becoming singled, othered, removed from a group, isolated. That's marginalization and othering. On its most simple term, you can think of 5 children on a playground. 4 of the children realize that among the 5 of them, they're the fast ones. And so the 4 of them want to be on one kickball team and they other the 5th. In that case, it's athletic ability. They're being marginalized based on their athletic ability. That's in its most simple form. And then of course, biases and knapsack. And so for a bias, these are implicit or explicit, and it's a prejudge, it's a prejudiced. We are exhibiting bias when we kick one student out of the group of 5 because he or she isn't as fast. That's an explicit bias. Implicit bias is walking through and seeing, that student wore boots to school instead of running shoes. He must not be very fast, right? We're missing kind of this conscious decision in making in the process. And we're going to use this here in practice. The one assumption I need you to hold is that some identities, experiences, or group memberships carry more privilege than others. This has been debated for centuries. It will continue to be debated. And I ask your permission, just for this 60 minutes, to hold that in truth. Just for the next 60 minutes, hold it in truth that some identities, some experiences, some group memberships carry more privilege than others. All right, before we kind of dive into some discussing of terms, are there any questions on the working definitions that I assigned these 4 terms? All right, let's dive in. So one of our goals is to identify the multiple identities that we hold. Identities include, but are not limited to, your gender, race, religion, class, socioeconomic class, education level, family structure, physique. There are many more. Take a moment on scratch paper or something near you, perhaps on your computer or your phone. Which identity of those or of others do you lead with? Which is most front of mind for you? Which of these identities do you hide or promote? Let's start with those two. I would love to have folks share as they're comfortable with, but which identity do you personally lead with, or which ones do you promote or hide? We're all educators and we have great wait time, I promise.
I can start. Just because it was apparent in my introduction, I'll go with that. When I thought about what do I lead with, apparently I lead with I'm a mom, so my family structure. I promote because of my role and mission, and because it's so ingrained. I think religion has to be up there. When I introduce myself, I typically promote that. One that I don't talk much about, I would say would be my race, and probably just because one, it's apparent, and two, I see it as just an understood privilege, like that it's a privileged race. I don't know if I've ever led with my physique either. I've not thought of physique in terms of identities before.
Thank you for sharing, Whitney.
I was actually gonna, as far as the ones I identify with and the ones I promote, were pretty similar to Whitney's. But, I read the last word, physique, and there was a time in my life where that was something I promoted because I was very conscientious of working out and being fit and doing things to, feel good about myself physically. But physique over time has become something that I hide because I'm not as active and I'm not as proud of the work that I do or don't do actually. But that was the only thing I was going to mention other than what Whitney shared. Family is very important to me, so it is something that I really do lead with. And then, just working in a Catholic institution, I'm very proud of my faith. And, even though I'm not a religion teacher or anything like that, it's again, one of the reasons I chose to move from public school to private school or to parochial school is that just could be a place where I could talk about my faith with students.
Thank you, Bob.
I'll step in. Obviously, I think my lead when people see me is my religion. Being a brother of Holy Cross, people see me that way. They've known me that way for the time I've been here. My education level is high, something I kind of promote in terms of using what I've learned and helping other people with their situations through the what I've experienced. I've been in several states and different situations, so it's important to me. I'm likewise not worried about my physique. I'm at the point where I'm letting it go a little bit, but John, we can talk about bicycling. Because that's my exercise point.
Very good. Thank you for sharing. Anyone else want to share?
I'll go. I think I lead with religion, education, institutional knowledge, family. Those are the things that I would go look on that side. The one that is hard to hide but has to fit in is I'm in an all-boys school, so gender becomes an issue in my situation. So that would be the one I would hide.
Much like everybody, yeah, being the director of mission, religion, education level, institutional knowledge, family structure has been something that just recently developed. I love the physique part. I'm just thinking that I lead with that a lot. I mean, I even challenge my students to push-up contests. So yeah, it's a great thing to beat them, by the way.
And are you in a high school or an elementary school?
High school.
Yeah, of course, of course. It would be a little awkward if that was a K-8 school. So similarly, I think one's, identities that I lead with are my faith. I think implicitly I lead with my gender. I don't realize that, and certainly my race. I am extra aware of my race. I'm in a multiracial family, my immediate family. So that's something that I'm often thinking about in my personal life. And I think in also professionally, Bob and I's school is largely an African-American school, around 80%. And so we become the minority of the school in terms of racial identification. I think I sometimes hide, consciously or unconsciously, both my physique, of course, but also class. I find myself adjusting my perception or the positionality of class, depending on who I'm talking to. I'm from northern Wisconsin, and grew up very much in the woods, with pretty lower class, and have advanced through different education, and am grateful for what life's afforded. But I find myself moving my understanding of class depending on who I'm talking to. I think these are some of the different identities that I hold. Let's hold on to our identities for just a moment and switch to this idea of lenses. So recognizing that you have multiple identities, and that you carry them differently. I want to introduce you to the idea of 3 lenses. And these are points of view about your identities. So the first point of view we just did, this is the first lens, how you see yourself. Which identities you bury, which ones you promote, which ones enter the door when you walk into the house versus when you walk into the office, versus when you walk into the supermarket. Lens B, though, is how you want to be seen. So physique is an easy one on lens B, right? I want to be seen young, youthful, strong on my bicycle, the ability to bench press 300 pounds while also running a marathon, while also being able to do yoga. I mean, that is physically impossible. But lens B is how you want to be seen. And the third lens is how others see you. So how you are actually seen. And the key with lens C is that it has to be defined. So how you want your family to see you, perhaps, how you want your students to see you, how you want your colleagues to see you. Each of those are different. With these, let's take the discussion just a little further for a moment. We talked about being an athlete. We brought up faith a number of times, but how does your strongest identity, the one that you led forward with in the last comment, how does it change based on these 3 lenses? And let's stick with in the workplace. How do they change in the workplace for lens C? Oh, I'm sorry. No. For lens B, how does your strongest identity change in the workplace?
I think this is a really interesting question for me because my 3 oldest are in the same school that I teach in. And so although I lead with family, I try to be extra cautious not to separate my parent hat from my administrator hat, and making sure that the decisions I'm making are not just based on my personal experience as a parent, and trying to make sure that there is appropriate boundaries. And so it's something that I'm navigating a lot in that realm. It's also interesting because like you, have mixed race family. My youngest is African American. And so depending on the people I meet in my role, in some ways I find myself talking about that more as we make kind of DEI and inclusiveness a more important part of what we're doing. So just in, but I've never really thought about that in terms of, I've always thought about it in terms of boundaries, but never in terms of lenses.
Interesting. Let's thank you for sharing. Let's shift it just a little bit. In the last question, we all answered which identity we carry most forward for ourselves. For lens C, would other people say the same thing for you in your workplace? What would other people say is the most dominant identity that you carry in your workplace?
The family piece would probably be right up top. I find that I tell stories as a way of teaching and engaging in conversation. So they definitely, I would guess that most people at Gilmore know about my family and my kids and who they are. But in my role, you know, as faith would be right up front too.
Great. Others?
So I've spent most of my career at Bishop McNamara as a teacher in the math department. And what came to mind when John brought this question to the table was, you know, over my teaching career, having to teach students of colleagues, you know, and how that can create at times a little tension. They don't know whether they can approach if there's an issue, or they're not, you know, you're not sure how it's going to be received, you know, when you may have to bring an issue to them. But it really gets interesting when, you know, as Whitney mentioned, my kids, I've got 3 kids, and this is the one school year where all 3 of my kids are at the school. And just, you know, I've had some parent-teacher conferences for my own children, and how very often teachers will say, I didn't want to bug you about this. I didn't want to bring this, you know, I didn't want to get them in trouble. You know, they just treat the whole parent dynamic very differently when it's one of their colleagues. So just definitely, you know, one of the things that it becomes a, you know, definitely one of the identities that you're, you know, especially when you have kids in the building, that, you know, becomes one of the forefront identities, but just the challenges that come with it.
Thanks, Bob. Let's push forward, and I want you to keep in mind this idea of how you see yourself, how you want to be seen, and how others see you. And keep in mind your multiple identities. If we stick, for example, with physique, how I see myself is I'm rather lazy at night. I'm pretty tired. How I want to be seen as someone who's rather in shape, and how others see me. I think they see me as fit, but I don't really know. I'm making a large guess there. And one of the only ways to check that is to ask. So Bob, how do you see my physique? He doesn't actually have to answer that, right? But if we make this a little more complicated and we say my class, how I see myself is pretty middle class. How I want to be seen is down to earth, approachable, also middle class. How others actually see me, though, is a giant question mark. And it has a significant influence on how I lead and how I manage. If I'm seen as upper class and unapproachable, the policies we decide, the programs we put on, the way we speak, our emails can come across much different. And if we take this even one step higher and say our race or our faith, how I see myself, how I want to be seen, and how others actually see me, there are a tremendous amount of variables that go into this. And so let's talk about that just a little bit here. Some of our identities and thus our privileges are assigned to us by society. Society alone is the only one who can really, self-correct that. Since we are all members of society, and society is self-defined, it could be the school you're in, it could be the city you live in, the state you live in, the church you belong to, or the school system that you teach in. Since we're all members of that group, we alone are the only ones who can correct those identities and some of those biases that are carried within. And so within your community, within your school community, if there is a disconnect about how wealthy people or poor people or white people or Black people or large people or small people experience systems, policies, classes, then we have a significant disconnect. And that's what I want to talk about next year. And so we talked a little bit about point of view and the lenses. And now what I want to discuss a little bit is how do we know a student or a person is being marginalized, and what causes that idea? Hint, spoiler alert, it has to do with how you understand your identity, and how you occupy spaces and how we speak in spaces. The first one that I want to talk about is the idea of policy and practice. And policy doesn't mean you have to be a principal or a president per se. It could be anything. It's the programs we lead in our work as director of mission. It's the way we recruit our students. It's the materials that we print. It's the way we assign detention. Looking at these is tremendously important. And so, for example, let's consider a couple of samples from our school. Detention, who gets it? Who doesn't get it? Who's assigning detention to whom and who isn't? Athletic awards, which groups get them? Which do not? Are they the upper class students? Are they the lower class students? Are they the white students? Are they the brown students? Are they the students on the east side of the tracks or the west side of the tracks? The students who go to church, those who don't go to church? Honor roll, which groups are getting them? Racially, class, gender. And then related to the policy and practices, the stories we tell. What stories are you telling about your students? A little, vignette, the stories we tell really stood out for me, especially in my move from charter schools to Bishop McNamara. Charter schools, if you're not familiar, are a form of public school that's publicly funded, but privately managed. And they typically open in, at least in DC, in lower income communities. And so we served a largely Black population in DC. My move to Bishop McNamara, some of our funders and donors at the charter school said, huh, you are doing the exact same work. I'm sure you will attract the exact same dollars of fundraisers for folks who want to help out those children. I said, oh my, who are we talking about here? Because I worked with low-income youth in DC, and now I'm going to a school that's a largely Black population still, does that also means it's a largely low-income school? Right, so the stories we tell, the way we print, the way we speak, the way we recruit, all say something about the identities that we put forward. So let's put the work back on ourselves here for a little bit of discussion. When you think about the department that you work on or the team that you work on, how does that identity, you can use race if you would like to, you can use faith, gender, class, any of those other identities we talked about. How do those identities of your team or your department reflect the exact students or employees they're serving? How are they the same? So what identities do you share with the people you work with? How are they the same and where are they different? We're looking for kind of this separation of identity.
Sorry, John.
Okay. Oh,
Just-
go ahead, Whitney. Yep.
Just to clarify, are you talking about how they're the same or different from our colleagues, or how we as a group of colleagues are same or different from the students?
From the students, yes. I'm sorry. So the team that you work on, how is it different than the students you're serving?
So within the theology department, I can use that as an example. It's interesting because all of our teachers are Catholic and our student population is not all Catholic. And obviously it's a Catholic school, so they know what they're signing up for. But we also have a residence hall and we have international students, many from China. And so we've had to make, we've actually created a new introductory course to make sure that they have foundational information about Christianity so that they can participate and engage in that level. So one of the differences I think is that we do not reflect the different faith traditions of our students. I think something that we have been very intentional about is even within the Catholic faith, there are many different ways of living and seeing the church and the faith. And we have worked really hard to try to make sure that we have great diversity in that, that aspect. So some more right-leaning, some more left-leaning, to try to accurately reflect the Catholic experiences of our students.
Great, very good. Anyone else notice any big difference between the identities they or their teams hold and the students' identities?
I can tell you that Moreau in the Bay Area, the ethnic breakdown of our students has radically changed from, I mean, I came to Moreau in '95, but predominantly Caucasian, and now predominantly Asian, high Filipino, probably about 45% Asian. African-American population has grown, large Latino population. Faculty and staff, it's gotten a lot better, but there's been an intentionality on that part in terms of finding faculty members, especially of color, but still, as most places, a lot of work to be done.
Yeah.
Board membership needs to be a little more reflective of student population, which has been pointed out by fellow faculty members. So, yeah.
Yeah, and so that is, I appreciate you sharing that. So when we look back at our lenses, the only way to understand lens C is to ask, right? Or to include a diversity of thought, a diversity of opinion, and not necessarily racial diversity, class, gender, faith representation in the school. How is this landing? Where is this coming from? Are you feeling invested in it? And so when we talk about the idea of students or adults in our schools being marginalized or othering, it means that they feel separated. They don't feel included. So when we say we need better board representation, someone's experience is that they don't belong. And perhaps it's because of the systems or policies or recruiting that we're doing. And so that is the second assumption that I'm asking, and the only other assumption that I'll ask you to hold today. And that is that we want our schools to be affirming and inclusive spaces for all members of our community. So the first one is that some identities carry more privilege than others. Everyone in here is an educator or a leader, which means you get to make decisions. That is a certain privilege. That is one of your identities. That is a privilege in the school. The second assumption is that we all need to assume that each other on this call, that we want our schools to be affirming and inclusive spaces for all members of our community. If we hold both of those to be true, then we also have to accept that othering and marginalization of any kind, someone feeling outside, separated, is an ism. Racism, sexism, genderism, classism, right? That is being separated, removed, isolated. And the big thing, the big point of this chat today is how we mitigate that. How do we mitigate people feeling separated? What is your role? It has a lot to do with your identity and how you see yourself and the spaces you occupy. All right, so assumption 2, we want our schools to be affirming and inclusive places. If we agree that we want everyone together, then we have to agree that othering or separating students out is an ism. This is where it gets just a little bit tricky, and I'm going to skip that. I'm going to go back here. This is where it gets a little bit tricky. Our role in schools is to make students feel included and all together, but we all have students who aren't feeling included, and we certainly have adults and employees who do not necessarily feel included. The first thing to do is what do we do when we don't feel included, when we feel isolated, or I feel like I'm not welcome at the table because I'm a female and I'm not a male, or I don't feel welcome at the table because I'm not white, I'm Black, or I don't feel welcome at the table because I don't happen to be a Catholic. All of these are forms of othering. You don't feel it. And experience is reality. Bob Nolte cannot tell someone on his team, oh, no, we're past that. Everyone's welcome at the leadership table. No, experience is reality. If you have people saying they don't feel welcome in a space, or they're sitting off to the side, they're being othered. It's their experience. And so our role is to mitigate that experience. The easiest way to talk about mitigating experiences like this is along lines of race. But it can be held across all identities. Dr. Howard Stevenson, brother of, oh Lord, his name just escaped me, Brian Stevenson, who wrote Just Mercy. It was a book and then a movie. Howard Stevenson has dedicated his work to mitigating students' feelings of being the minority in the school. And he says, you know what, students, this is what you should do when you feel like you are a victim of racism. You should do 3 things: calculate, locate, and communicate. So he says, on a scale of 1 to 10, name how stressed you are, locate, point in your body where that feeling is, and communicate. Think in your head, am I giving myself any self-talk? Let's go back to our identities for a moment. Let's say you identify as a minority identity and you're not feeling welcome in a classroom. It's all the people in there are white, or they're all Catholic except for me. Why did my mom send me to this Catholic school? I'm not Catholic. You calculate how stressed are you? For some of our 16-year-olds, it's an 11 out of 10, and it sits right here in their heart. The communication is key. Dr. Stevenson says, communicate with yourself and ask, what self-talk are you doing? How do you know that students know you're not a Catholic? Or jumping over to lines of gender. One boy, we all know the high school boy having to walk into a room full of girls. He's 14. He's beyond stressed. He cannot believe his mom made him sign up for art class. His stress is right here in his heart, right in his throat. And the self-talk is, my God, all of my guys are going to think that I'm a girl, that I want to be around girls, that I'm not manly enough. Dr. Stevenson says to respond to racism, sexism, genderism, separation, right? This idea of being minoritized, you have to calm yourself down first. You have to relax, because then you can think fluidly about the situation. So now that we're helping people understand, including ourselves, what it means to respond to racism, we then have to talk about how to make some of that systemic change. So the systemic change, a systemic response, that's our responsibility. We are educators, we are leaders, and our work at mitigating that feeling among students. Now, being the only boy in a classroom full of girls, that's the easy one, right? It happens every day. It's not great. We want everyone to feel included. The hard one is when you have only 10% of your school identifying as a minority identity across any one of those 10 or 15, identities that we discussed. That's hard. How are you the only Black student in the class? How are you a scholarship recipient and believing everyone knows? How is it that you don't have a car, but at your school, everyone has a car? All of these aspects minoritize students. They marginalize students. They separate students. And so we have to think very closely about how we teach our students to respond to that. For those of you in adult management roles, this is 10x important. If you have adults in your school and in your circle who do not feel like they belong because of their identity, they're not going to be there as long as we want them to be there. So the systemic response is really a series of investigations, and we'll kind of close in discussion on this about how do we inventory these spaces and these identities. So let's take a look here. How do we prevent the marginalization and othering students, adults, spaces that we occupy? First, we got to seek consultation from people with different identities than our own. This is where the big movement of diversifying boards came from. And perhaps more importantly, having faculty that reflect our students. The second thing we have to do is to give ourselves space to think before speaking. This is Dr. Stevenson's work, right? Thinking, breathing, locating, where do you feel the pain? What self-talk are you doing? Are you convincing yourself that you don't belong and no one else is thinking about it? And then the third thing is to provide feedback. Have the conversation. Jason Reynolds is fantastic. And I hope you got a chance to listen to his talk this afternoon. I had lunch with him a few months ago. As I shared, I'm new to Bishop McNamara. And I said to him, I said, what about your experience makes you want to continue to do this work today? And he said, because I don't need to convince people who don't look like me the experience I'm having. That's up to other people. That's up to people like me who look like our educators. Jason Reynolds went to a school, Bishop McNamara, that at that time was still a largely Black student population with a majority white teaching team, who needed to have the discussion of, do your students feel included? And if they don't, what work do we need to do? This is the work we need to do. So within our work, you can think of a policy perhaps, a practice, or maybe even a recent event. And I want you to break it down over the three aspects of work that we've just discussed. So before we move forward, anything within your work, think of a policy or a practice that is perhaps making a student or an adult feel isolated or separated. So with that, the lens one is, how did you experience it? What have you done related to that policy? What is your own experience with that policy? Lens two, you guessed it. How do you want it to be experienced? What did you hope was accomplished? And we'll share here in a moment. And of course, lens three, how is it actually experienced? What impact does this have on others? I would love to hear a couple of examples that you might be thinking about.
Well, the one that just totally jumped to my mind, and I'm sure my fellow classroom teachers, when COVID hit and we went to distance learning, discussions about curriculum, and I remember at the beginning there, and I fell into this trap too. There was this thought of, okay, the students are at home. They now have more time for work, more time for study, because they are traveling to school, there's less distractions. And we slowly found out the opposite, that we realized that students, even though they were in their home structure, whatever it is, were taking care of brothers and sisters, we're doing family chores, and we realized that they actually had less time for their studies, and we were actually giving them more work and they had less time to do it. And so we saw this beginning of kids were just the great, and I mean, it was a real kind of eye-opening for me. And so there was an immediate kind of this idea of essentialism. What is essential to your curriculum, toned down, and again, it's been a work in progress, but that was a definitely eye opener for me, because I fell into that trap too. It's like, God, they're at home, they got more time.
I appreciate that. What a wonderful story. Lens one and lens three were significantly disconnected. Others?
I'm just starting to grapple with it, but with COVID, we recently announced that for graduation it will be in person, but you can only bring 2 guests. And I get it, like, it makes sense, it's what we can do, but I think it's probably experienced very differently amongst different families. If the student is the first student to graduate from high school and is, it's such a huge success for a family, it might be different than a student who's an only child and both their parents can be there, what does it mean based on different family structures? If you're coming from a divorced household and you have multiple families, or, live with multi-generations, depending on your family structure, I feel like it's probably the policy that came down was experienced very differently. by different families.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing. Others?
One, we just had break, a teacher go out for health reasons that had major surgery. And we chose not to, and the teacher basically said, at this time, please don't say anything. And when one of the teachers found out, they sent out a major email. Fortunately, they kept it to some of the administrators. Why did you not tell us? Why are you hiding this from us? And you know, that's a struggle. As associate principal, I dealt with that many times because I dealt with substitutes. You know, why is she out today? Where's she at? What's going on? And sometimes I couldn't say. I shouldn't say what's going on. You know, so that's a real touch point in being sensitive to the person who's out and being sensitive to the entire teaching staff. My one sister says, when you're sick, you should tell people because they'll pray for you. And that's a wonderful thought. But if you're saying, please don't, I got to be careful.
Yeah.
It hurt me when this came out this morning that this teacher was seriously offended that we didn't put out a bulletin saying.
And I wonder what that teacher's experience was, the one who was offended. And I'm, you know,
Well, the one that had the major, the one that had the big message had her own major surgery, but that was with prior knowledge.
Mhm.
One was with, no, you need surgery tomorrow.
Mhm.
You know, hers was actually delayed to summer. The first one, the one who sent the message, had postponed it till summertime
Right.
because of recovery time on purpose. But this one was, no, please come in tomorrow for your surgery.
Yeah.
So
And I wonder, you know, the teacher that reached out this morning, I wonder how he or she wanted their message to be experienced. Did they want it to be experienced as, you principal, you didn't know what you were doing, you had a misstep? Or did they want it to be experienced as, I'm such a caring, passionate person, I would have loved to include them in prayer. How could you let me neglect this? No, you know, the challenge with that is is relational, right? You've probably had at least a dozen other experiences with this teacher who reached out this morning, all which influence your perception of their intention. My goal with this tool is that we can take examples as specific as the teacher who reached out about missing a notification and walk through the three lenses, and as large as something like what Bob and I had, and we've all had to do, is decide when our employees have to come back into the building, or when our teachers are permitted to continue teaching from home. My goodness, as a new president in the school, my lens for how I experienced the recall was much different than how others experienced it. And my intent was much different. The only way to mitigate that, as we share in the bottom, if lens 1 and lens 3 are not the same, I said, hey, it's time to come back to school to teach in person. How I intended for that to land was much different than what lens 3 was. Then biases are getting in the way of me understanding the experience of others. There are some biases that I'm missing. I'm the president and I'm telling every teacher in the building to come back. There's a bias. There's an authority bias, there's a privilege bias, there's a access bias, there's a bias of information. Why didn't you share more, John? Why did you tell us before a 4-day weekend, John? Right? All of these different things stack up to the experience. Bob's laughing because that was the reality. In my head, telling you before a 4-day weekend was a blessing. You can now plan, you can come back to the building, you can We had teachers scattered across the country. You have time to reestablish. Boy, was that a misstep, right? Had I done a little polling and checked in with folks, they probably would have liked to have gotten through their 4-day weekend before being stressed about being thrown back into COVID. Can you think of any other policies, ideas, experiences, or groups with which this might be helpful? Good. Well, I'll work to kind of move us to closing here for a moment. We can stay on to continue discussing. This work for me it was largely founded because I was a white leader in an all-Black school. I needed to understand how my position influenced policy, parent phone calls, discipline, hiring. And what it's really led for me is an understanding that our identities are much, much more numerous than just race. As we know, though, nationally, we're in a racial crisis. We've been in one for a couple of years now. Well, we've been in one for generations, but over a couple of years, it's become very public. And so as we look at our schools and our policies, I really encourage you to consider this idea of multi-lenses. But as I said, for me, it was really rooted for me in my racial position within the school. And so I wanted to share 4 text selections that you might enjoy if you find yourself in a similar position. The first, and I'll summarize them briefly and then close out. The first is by Laborie, and Laborie does a wonderful study looking over the last 100 years of education in America, and shows that 100 years ago, the top degree you could earn, by now it's actually probably 150 years ago, the top degree you could earn was around 2 years of post-high school study. And if you did 2 years of post-high school study, you were among the most privileged class. He shows that a few years after that, as society began to catch up, they then required a 4-year study. You needed a full 4-year college. If you had a college degree, you were in the top class in the country. A decade after that, we added on an advanced degree. Now you needed to go to master's school, get your master's degree. If you got a master's degree, you are now the most advanced. Well, by the time the lower class caught up to that, they achieved a master's degree. Now we need an advanced degree, a JD, an MD. You can see where the pattern's going. Over the past 150 years, we've continued to add further advanced studies. Now you can have a postdoc, a double postdoc, right? All of these levels continue to separate access between the haves and the have-nots. So if you think about a family who's never had a parent graduate from high school, let alone college, the idea of a double postdoc is absolutely mind-blowing. That's Laborie. The second one is how to change this story about students of color. And this really got into what I talked a little bit about when we say, what are we saying about our students? When I had a donor come up and say, oh, it will be easy for you to fundraise for financial aid for your student because all of your students are Black. Excuse me? That is not necessarily our fundraiser. We're building a new building, actually. And you know, we have a lot of very well-off families, thank you. Let's change that narrative. But it all depends on admissions. Bob ran admissions for us. And I said, Bob, that one cover on the admissions book has all white students and we are only 10% white. What story are we telling about who belongs and who doesn't belong? The last two, Stevenson, both by Howard Stevenson, Fluttering Around the Racial Tension of Trust, examines this idea of what it means to be a student with a teacher whom doesn't share the same identity as you. It could be as simple as male and female, right? It's often more further divided along lines of race, and then promoting the racial literacy. All right, that is all that I had to share, but I would love to open up for questions, probing challenges, and anything like that.
It's a small enough group, so anybody who has a question or comment, please just Just speak up.
So John, one of your main ideas, and this has been very thought-provoking for me, is the importance of asking people how you're being perceived. And obviously, you know, you can do surveys and things like that, but it seems like in some situations you would have to have that challenging conversation. Do you have any advice or suggestions on how you start kind of becoming more approachable so that people feel free to, you know, approach you and say, I know you probably had good intentions, but this is how it felt, or just to make that more of a cultural experience in the school?
Yeah, surveys are great. That's one good input. Another one is asking the question in conversation of people with different identities than you. What was your experience with this? How did you experience this? What would you have done differently? I think the other big thing that is challenging. We have to read text from people who don't think like we do. You know, especially if we're in a school with different identities than our own. It could be as simple as gender, reading female authors and female points of view about school management. It could be as deep as race and class. How do we manage schools differently? How are the values different? But perhaps most importantly is ensuring that the identities represented in your decision-making circle are diverse and represent those that you're serving. And probe deeply on that, right? It's not as simple as, do I have a Black male serving on my board? It's no, do I have a white female who grew up in this community serving on my board? It's very easy for us to give labels to people's experiences, but I think those are the two. You know, get really deep on what is your experience with this idea, with this rule, with this policy, and ensuring that the people around you who have your ear, who you actually listen to, think differently than you.
I'm sort of struck by a larger view. I don't want to say this next year's incoming frosh enrollment was was a struggle, and so I'm wondering, and I know this is kind of a national thing with COVID. A lot of school, Catholic enrollment has plummeted. In some schools, dropped 50%. And trying to look like how is the school going to be perceived, or how will it be perceived? How is it looked at internally? How do we present this to future students? I mean, all these kind of questions are going on my own, with these three lenses. I know it's kind of a broader macro in terms of enrollment, but I mean, it's just where my mind has been thinking the past couple of minutes.
Yeah, I think depending on who guides your enrollment, at Bishop McNamara, we lean pretty heavily on our board of directors to influence things like tuition price points and financial aid offered. We have already scheduled our discussion to say we need to have a COVID step back and discuss whether or not our identity, the identity we strive for as a school, is different in post-COVID. And whether it's different because we need to be able to pay our bills, or because it's different because our parents now need something different from us, is a really important conversation. And I think we can use those three lenses. I think the other thing, and I don't know as much about the Bay Area, but in DC, I've leaned really heavily on some of the private school, independent school membership groups to be answering that big question. What are the larger regional shifts we're seeing around what parents are looking for in a private education, in a faith education, and how are those different? And being able to pivot quickly, all the while ensuring that the voices who are influencing the shift in the school are diverse, and reflect this school, the student body in a whole. Because you're right, schools that pivot post-COVID responsibly and accurately will flourish and will do quite well. Those who fail to pivot, who aren't considering any other identity other than the one they've occupied the last 50 years, may struggle because communities are shifting pretty radically. Are there membership groups like that in the Bay Area?
There are. I mean, some of the, obviously for us, a lot of, we have our local Catholic feeder schools who struggling, more charter schools opening up in the area, trying to, gather more public school kids. So there, the element of not being able to bring students onto campus was probably a big factor, but I
think, the two quick answers, and happy to have a conversation more about it offline. I can put my contact information up here in a minute. I think this is also the time we have a great partnership with the Archdiocese of Washington, and the amount of data that they're able to pull in is nothing right now compared to the National Association of Independent Schools. And so, is NAIS expensive? It's very expensive. Is their data rich right now? It's super rich. And so polling on, becoming even a 1 or 2 year member of an NAIS or a charter school conglomerate, or figuring out who are the school advocates in the Bay Area and buying into their information and joining in on some of their seminars to understand how are parents and families moving about the region, how are their income-driven school selection models changing, is really important. Because then the solution to recruitment might be as simple as doing targeted Facebook advertisings in a different zip code and promising transportation, right? It could literally just be eradicated by that. At McNamara, we are blessed that we're not seeing a significant shift, but we remain among the lowest tuition price point in the city. And so we are watching the enrollment trends closely, and the Archdiocese is having a hard time in some of their schools meeting that. But we this year bought into the local NAIS chapter, the local AISGW chapter, for no other reason than to put our ear to the ground and listen to what's going on. Where are the kids going? Where are the teachers going? Where are the dollars going? And how can we better serve our community? Because we have this, we have our faith, and that drives the mission of our school, and we have the business model, and they're very closely intertwined to ensure we continue having students coming in.
Well, John, I hate to be the person to say that I think time is kind
Absolutely.
of close, okay with it, but if you could put your contact information on the screen, that would be helpful. And I was wondering if we might be able to access your slides, which I think were excellent, and which really could help us reflect a little bit more, as we kind of go on forward. Would that be possible?
Absolutely. I tried to upload them into the system and had a hard time.
Yeah.
So it might be easier for me to email them to you. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. I have a couple of articles I'll attach.
Very good. Very good. And I just want to thank you for really giving us a lot to think about, okay, with it. Really a wonderful presentation. And I thank Whitney, Teresa, Bob, Peter, and Brother James for your participation in this session. And I do want to echo, and I forget if it was Bob or Peter, okay, who said this was one of the finest convocations that we've had in a long time. I know I go back a long time. I've been away from the convocation, but I was an administrator at I administrated at 2 of the Eastern Province schools, And I did serve for a time as a corporate member on Bishop McNamara. It was more active during the days of Heather Gossett. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And of course, I know Marco very well
Yeah.
as well. So
Yeah.
I don't want to leave him out with that. But
Very
thank
good.
you all very, very much for your time. And John, again, Godspeed as you kind of lead the school to its new chapter in the history of Holy Cross. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you all for joining. Please reach out. We'd love to stay connected.
Thank you.
And we'll talk soon.
Very good.
Thanks, John.